is it? You know, I think the president blew an opportunity to bring the United States together, bring some unity. This would have been a perfect opportunity to do that. I think a lot of people in this country were looking for the hope and optimism that would come from the President of the United States at a time like this where we're so racially divided. But we're more racially divided than we ever have been in recent memory. Yet the president goes and he gives a speech like this. It's infuriating for me. I mean, how about a little optimism, Mr. President? And then he goes down and has this whole liberal agenda of what he wants going on. Health care, and, you know, this is a right, and it goes down the list. Even the Los Angeles Times had a headline today that said, Obama honors King, pushes his political agenda on March anniversary. I mean, it's just such a self-centered thing to do, but it's always all about him, isn't it? This is so far away from the original words of Martin Luther King, and I just want to read a little portion of what Martin Luther King originally said. He said, "When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir." In other words, he said, both men, black and white, were supposed to be guaranteed the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is something I think we could all rally around, but was gravely missing from today's events. Joining us tonight is Charles Butler, a conservative talk show host based in Chicago. Charles is also a member of the Project 21 National Advisory Council. Charles, welcome.
Thank you.
So did you have the same feeling that I had today watching speaker after speaker going up to that podium, from unions to all kinds of other progressive political hacks up there, taking over this speech today, which could have been an opportunity to really unify the country? Did you see it the same way?
No question. I saw it the same way. And you know, what's really, as you made a point, there were no Republicans. And you have to remember that Republicans led the way for the Civil Rights Acts of 64 and 65. President Eisenhower clearly did that.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because we were talking about that earlier today, and I thought to myself, you know, actually Charles mentioned this to me in the break, that CNN even went so far as to misrepresent the fact that President Bush wasn't there, Bush 41. He's old, he's elderly, he was unable to make it, and he was invited because you had Jimmy Carter, Clinton, and President Obama, but that's not just, it was a misrepresentation of why he wasn't there. But he was those were the only ones that were invited, and I think they did that under obligation because he was an ex-president.
Well, you had Bush 43, who had clearly more blacks in leadership positions than any other president in our history, including the current president, who only has one Bahamian American in his cabinet, and that's Eric Holder.
Well, you know, I was really looking for more discussion on the progress that has been made,
right,
because especially now with the stories coming out of young black men and violence and gun violence in Chicago, you know, you see all these things going on. This could have been an opportunity to talk about some of the really important progressive things that have been made, progress that have been made in the black community. And I just want to throw up a graphic. For example, the poverty rate in the black community has actually gone down significantly since 1963. We have college graduates, black college graduates have gone up exponentially since 1963. I mean, these are things that the president and these civil rights leaders should have championed today, don't you think?
I do. But when you have a president whose policies, education policies, are going to decimate historically black colleges and universities, and last week, one of Arnie Duncan's aides told the college black president, HBC college presidents, to be quiet and don't mention their policies again, or there would be a price to pay. That is a quote from one of his top aides.
I was very disappointed today. This is obviously a massive moment in American history. The speech is unbelievable if you listen to it, and the way he uses his voice, I've never heard anyone quite do that. And really, he's the heir to Lincoln and to Frederick Douglass. Lincoln used to say, "All honor to Jefferson," and he would go on to say, you know, he put these values into the Declaration. And the problem with America was that they weren't extended to everyone. There's no problem with the values. The problem is that they didn't cover everybody.
Right.
So when Obama says, you know, this was about bringing people into the middle class, no, it wasn't. It was about applying American values to everyone wherever they fall. And then you see Bill Clinton come up, and I have a fairly positive view of Bill Clinton in my mind until he speaks. And he mentioned climate change, he mentioned guns, he mentioned Common Core. None of these have anything to do with Martin Luther King whatsoever.
That's right.
And to me, I wondered today, I mean, imagine if Mitt Romney had been president, and he'd spoken at this, and he'd said, well, remember that 17 states had government-mandated segregation. Now I'm going to use that as a segue to talking about cutting taxes. People would rightly have been outraged.
Yes.
And that's what the president did.
And presidents have so few opportunities. I mean, they have plenty of opportunities to speak, but how many authentic, real opportunities to sort of rise above it? Just say, in this moment, this is not about politics, this is not about particular issues, this is about what he transcended and what he accomplished, what Martin Luther King did for this country.
But Pete, those are presidents who actually revere the office of the presidency, where they realize that the office is bigger than themselves.
I'm gonna take
this guy in the White House thinks it's about him all the time.
Fair enough, but I take a little. I mean, I think you also have a generation of black leaders as well, in Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and others who did sit at counters that were segregated. I mean, you still have I think this won't go away until it's a generational thing in a sense. I think
I don't know
some
about
of the sharpness.
It's not surprising this turned into a political event today, because the Democratic Party and 90% of the black vote have marched in lockstep for some time now. John McWhorter had a fascinating column today in the Wall Street Journal. I'll put it to Charles, where he talked about 60 years ago. I think it's interesting that Tara put up these comparisons between 1960s and today, because in the 1960s, the movement was to do away with bigotry. It was to do away with institutional racism. Today, you have leaders like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton who seem to be on a crusade to purge the soul of America, to look for the hidden racism that is never provable, nor never findable, nor curable. And because that is their motive, because that is their quest, it will always exist. It will always be there.
Well, I should say that these leaders, Reverend Jackson and Reverend Al Sharpton, always look for the lowest denominator and try to bring the lowest denominator up to a higher level. And believe me, there are a number of poor people who just need an opportunity, but there are plenty of poor people who don't want anything other than what they have. And those are the people that we continue to focus on, while, as you all have been pointing out, ignoring those who have achieved and are trying to achieve.
Right, and something else that was missing from Martin Luther King's speech 50 years ago was any talk of victimization. You know, he didn't go, nothing in his speech talked about how you're a victim and how the government has to come in and they're the end all, the be all. And these people, like you've mentioned now, Pete, the race merchants, as I call them, have really made a mockery of that. And I think it's disgraceful. And in Martin Luther King's own words, I went back and watched his speech today just as a refresher, and this really struck me. He said, in the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We see this every day going on right now.
That is straight out of Abraham Lincoln. It's effectively paraphrased. The United States suffers very, very badly at the hands of two men who wish they had been Martin Luther King, Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. You mentioned them. They want to have been Martin Luther King. They're not Martin Luther King, and they're desperate to find any small incident in which they can pretend to be so.
Yes. Elevate every subtle racism, every potential subtle racism. Elevate every case like George Zimmerman into the 1964 Civil Rights Act to prove not only their own worth, but to prove their own identity.
Well, all you had to do was watch back what happened last Saturday. We discussed this on Monday. Their own little rally where they profited financially from it, and the rhetoric was just absolutely disgraceful. That's what we're dealing with today's civil rights movement. Charles, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We'll have tonight's Misfit Stories up next.